Long-haul truckers, what's the creepiest, most paranormal thing you've seen on the road at night? Maybe a bit off the mark, but it still scared the crap out of me. I was headed west on I-76 here in Denver, just cruising along at about 70 miles per hour. Out of nowhere, I saw a massive, almost solid cloud of what looked to be dirt coming at me. I'd say it was at least 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall. I scanned ahead of me, but couldn't see any vehicle it could have come from. With nowhere to go, I slowed down and took the hit, hoping there wasn't anything big enough in there to come through the windshield or jack up my truck, owner-operator. It was pretty loud as I smashed through it. The instant it hit, I knew it wasn't dirt though. I immediately hit the washers because I couldn't see a damn thing through all of the carnage. My windshield was painted with guts. Turns out it was bees. Freaking huge bees that sounded like rocks when they hit. I can't even imagine seeing that swarm if I was walking. They would kill the crap out of anything in their path. I was driving near Las Vegas at around 3 a.m. I had been following a few black SUVs along the highway for a good hour or so. They had Nevada plates that were single-digit numbers in order 1, 2, 3. Suddenly, they all pulled off the highway down a dirt path. There was no mile marker or cactus that would indicate a path there. It was just dirt. After pulling off the road, they all turned their lights off. I didn't stick around. It was creepy. Well, I'm not a trucker, but a motorcyclist, which kinda makes it even more spooky. Drove home from my girlfriend's house, just a 20-minute ride, but it was 3 a.m. and the road goes through a forest without any streetlights. So I ride through the forest, already giving everything my little 50 CCM dirt bike had in it back then, and suddenly on the side of the road, a fucking naked mannequin is standing. I saw it appear in my headlights and drove by it only doing like 60 km/h. It was scary as hell. A fucking mannequin, standing there naked on the side of a dark road in a forest at 3 a.m. in the morning. Damn, I still get the shivers. I picked up a hitchhiker in my small Nissan Versa sedan, and we were driving down the freeway. There was a big vehicle in front of me, so I couldn't see what was in front of that when all of a sudden the other guy starts yelling, "Tire! Tire!" and pointing ahead of us. I slammed on my brakes just in time to see the SUV in front of us swerve too late as the car in front of it swerved as this massive tire that was rolling down the freeway demolished the front end of the vehicle in front of me and bounded high into the air, coming down in front of my car, where the steel band broke and stopped rolling. If I hadn't slammed on the brakes, it probably would have come down on top of me. He got out at the next gas station. I don't remember his name, but I think he saved my life that day. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He is the stereotypical old big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye. But while telling me this story, he had goosebumps and a concerned expression, which from this guy is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and shit-stained pants. I'll tell the story in the first person as he told it to me. Years ago, in the late 90s, I was on my way home from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5. I had just come off a string of days at home, so I knew I wasn't tired. I'm one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of bumfuck nowhere when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first, I just thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy's taking the antlers as a trophy or he's fucking sick. As I got closer still, I can now see that this guy's eating the fucking deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point, he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. He, or it, stands up, and that's when I see that it's fucking huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh fuck, this thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I'm about to point in the road he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay on it and get the hell out of there. As I'm passing it, it's looking at me again, not at the truck. It's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in here and knows where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete. Old truck design, where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing is fucking giant. I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scares the shit out of me. Sorry for the wall of text. It's a story worth sharing though. TLDR. Bigfoot eating a deer on the side of a road? My dad is a truck driver, and about 13 to 15 years ago, while resting at the side of the road, he woke up in the morning seeing that his entire trailer was robbed empty. My dad's a heavy sleeper, but his cargo could not have been stolen without at least a forklift, and everyone would have woken up by a forklift unloading a trailer. My dad suspects the robbers used a pump to get some kind of chloroform into his cabin to make sure he couldn't wake up. My great-uncle was a long-haul trucker, and he swears that one time he was driving down the road to see two guys pull up a rolled carpet out of the trunk of their car and throw it in the river. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's still creepy nonetheless. Okay, so here's a spook for you, and to this day I still have no idea WTF. So I was in the Virginia, Maryland area and had a lot of work-related sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday wrapped up, and I hit the road to some social arrangements I had made for the weekend. Spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of Virginia, got dragged off to other places even further out, the usual weekend fun times. It's late Sunday night when I have to leave, or I'm not going to be able to get home in time to start my thankfully late afternoon Monday. I'm fully rested, I didn't do any drinking, I'm not into drugs. On the highway at about 3 a.m. in the middle of bumfuck nowhere between Roanoke and DC, absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane simply because nobody else is around. No headlights for the past hour, no taillights either, no road lamps either. It's dark, it's mildly damp, it's foggy. I have the music up, I'm feeling good, all is fine. And then, I just happen to look to the left, and there's a fucking dog barking at me, a German Shepherd, in a car passenger seat, somewhat blue glow from the instruments inside the car, and it's got its face to its window and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it too, because at first my brain is not registering cop car, dummy. I'm doing 90 plus in a 75. I promptly have the oh shit moment when the dog, the instruments, the white Crown Vic, and light bar all click in my brain after a second hard look. I put my foot on the brakes and start slowing down hard but safe to pull over. I even put my blinker on to start shifting lanes over to the right to pull over because, wait, there's no shoulder on the left side of this road. I look back to my left where there is still no shoulder room for another car, and it's just gone. No trace. I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the fucking highway, flipped on all my light bars, and even looked around with my headlamp spot. There was nothing. No taillights, no headlights, no engine sounds, nothing. There are no other tire marks in the damp but mine, and I can see for a nice long distance both ways too. Nothing. My vehicle had great visibility and a lot of extra lighting, off-road SUV with the trimmings. There is no possible way somebody pulled a sneaky, let alone drove that fast on wet, sloped grass and rocks on my left side. So yep, there you have it. Ghost cop and his dog didn't like me speeding apparently. My dad has several stories from hauling logs in Idaho and driving trucks through Utah and Nevada. My favorite is from actually just in his pickup going through Utah. He said there was a light keeping pace with him out in the desert on a moonless night. It kept pace for a minute before it disappeared and his truck turned off. He stopped and turned it on and pulled off at the next diner. The folks in the diner called it a common occurrence. The creepiest is when he was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down from near Coeur d'Alene area during a snowy winter night. He was putting on chains before heading down steep grade and said all the hair stood up on his body. It felt like there was something watching him. Halfway down the switchbacks, he saw a large figure standing on a 20-foot tall embankment. As he got closer, it jumped down and the shoulders were as tall as the cab. In a single bound, it leaped down and then leaped over to the other side of the embankment. At the time, he thought it was a Sasquatch. Now he says it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He didn't stop to remove the chains until he was well away from the mountain. Creepiest. Driving I-40, I-30 through Texas and Arkansas, I would see what looked like animals or faces popping out of the bushes, but longer than a glance proved nothing there. They had just paved the highway, and there was hardly any traffic. I was dead tired, it was super dark, highway hypnosis, I suppose. Paranormal. When I went to local driving, My route ran near an air reserve base in Indiana, so you'd see planes and helicopters pretty often. One night, about 2 a.m., I was headed to pick up another load when I saw a bright green light in the corner of my windshield. It was too low to be an aircraft. It moved pretty slowly, then darted, and I lost sight of it behind some trees I drove by. Typical I saw UFO shit, but I still think it was just a helicopter or a jet that I saw at the perfect angle that turned after a takeoff. The jet pilots have broken the sound barrier over town a couple times in the past, sonic boom, so a jet flying abnormally isn't necessarily out of the realm of possibility. Just batshit crazy. Driving south on I-75 in the winter in Ohio, I witnessed a compact car like a Cobalt or similar get on the on-ramp to merge onto I-75 north and lost control. They went sideways, fell at least 6 feet off the ramp and onto the shoulder of the interstate, landing on all four wheels, spun 360 degrees, and then proceeded to merge into traffic like it was fucking nothing. Blew my fucking mind. The CB radio was going fucking nuts for about 5 minutes. Holy shit, who else just fucking saw that? Etc. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24, 36 hours or more without a break, longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like, how long would it take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 miles per hour? It had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing, like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. One night, after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games out loud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod jerk thing, which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random-ass mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road, going 60 plus miles per hour, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up saying, I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual. My grandfather was in the Air Force, and one night he was driving, back to his base maybe, I can't quite remember, and he saw a woman standing on the side of the road in a long white dress at about 2 a.m. He circled back to ask if she needed help, and she was nowhere to be seen. He searched for her for about an hour before giving up, and decided to leave it alone. When he decided to go on his own way, he had a strong feeling that he needed to switch lanes. He was on the road alone in the middle of the night, so he had no idea why. And just ahead on the road, there was a broken down truck with no hazards on that he would have hit and probably been killed by if he stayed in the lane he had been in. To this day, he's convinced the woman was trying to warn him, like an omen or something. In the early 1990s, I was driving from a small town in Ontario, Canada to Florida. I just got past the border at around 3 a.m. and found out one of the roads I needed to turn on was closed. There was no one around, so I looked at my map and decided to turn around and take a different road. As I made the turn, I immediately knew that I shouldn't go this way. It was a tiny one-way street, and there was trash scattered all over it. It looked like a huge group of people were just there, but there was no one. No streetlights, no other cars or houses or any reason for anyone to be out there. I was so creeped out that I turned around and went the correct way. This story isn't paranormal, but it is unusual. There was also a time where it was late at night again, and I was near Renfrew, Ontario, driving on an old, bumpy, twisty road. There was no one around. I looked to my left and I saw a face. It looked like a horse. I immediately stopped my car and noticed that there was a horse following me. After a few minutes, another car pulled up and they were looking for the horse. This one ended well, with the farmer taking the horse back. It really freaked me out though. I'm a truck driver in the UK. Was driving through rural Scotland one night going down a country lane. All of a sudden, I start to see flashing lights come through the trees. Lights of all colors flashing through the trees and causing some really freaky looking shadows on the road. I'm not a believer of aliens or anything, but my first thought was UFOs. Safe to say I put my foot down and got out of there. Found out the next day it was a rave happening in a field, but at the time it didn't half scare me. Myself and two friends had to drive from Laredo, Texas to Baton Rouge, Louisiana one night in my Ford van. It was about 2 a.m. There is a particularly long and dark section of highway just outside Laredo. No buildings, towns, or lights for about 50 miles. I was in the right lane, coming up on a truck, and pulled out in the left passing lane. As I was slowly overtaking this long truck, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement of this big truck towards the right shoulder. I saw the truck was swerving to avoid hitting a person dressed in all white face, whose arms were folded across the chest and eyes were closed as they walked across the highway. I swerved to the left and barely missed this ghostly looking person with my passenger mirror. Can still remember seeing that the eyes were closed. That's how close we came to hitting this person.